The late Assyrian Empire, also known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire, was, at its peak, one of, if not the, most powerful ancient civilization. This can be attributed to many different things. It can likely be attributed to their usage of iron weapons, but this may not be the only reason. So I've constructed a question to ask to find out the answer to this. Why didn't any civilizations before the Assyrians choose to make an advantage and use iron weapons? And how did the Assyrians use their many advantages to overcome other civilizations? We can start to answer this by asking, how did iron weapons and other iron tools help advance the Assyrian army? To start this off, armies before the Assyrians usually used bronze weapons, but bronze weapons were brittle and were not as strong. Iron weapons could be mass-produced and used by a much larger fighting force than was previously able to be put onto the field using bronze weapons. They were much stronger than bronze weapons. The Assyrian army fielded the very first iron army. Iron swords, iron spear blades, iron helmets, and even iron scales sewn as armor onto their tunics. Bronze weaponry offered no real contest. This new material, which was cheaper, harder, less brittle, could be ground sharper and kept a keener edge for far longer, was clearly the superior to bronze weapons. The Assyrians also put iron pieces into their shoes, which made it possible for the first time to fight on any terrain, however rough or wet, mountain or marsh, and in any season, winter or summer, making them the first all-season army. And, unlike their bronze sword counterparts, iron swords suffered less damage, and if bent, were able to return to their original shape. The daggers were also sturdier and were used commonly on enemies. They were carefully crafted and modeled like combat knives, which are highly valued. Was clearly the superior to bronze weapons. The Assyrians also put iron pieces into their shoes, which made it possible for the first time to fight on any terrain, however rough or wet, mountain or marsh, and in any season, winter or summer, making them the first all-season army. And, unlike their bronze sword counterparts, iron swords suffered less damage, and if bent, were able to return to their original shape. The daggers were also sturdier and were used commonly on enemies. They were carefully crafted and modeled like combat knives, which are highly valued. But these weren't the only weapons that the Assyrian army used. They had widespread use of siege engines and long-range weapons too, such as spears, javelins, bows, and slings. Arguably the most effective tool in the Assyrian infantry was the bow. Many men were equipped with spears, but it was the bow that allowed the mass Assyrians to outfight their foes in open battles, in skirmish, in broken terrain, and in siege warfare. More than anything else, the Assyrian army excelled at siege warfare, and was probably the first force to carry a separate corps of engineers. So was their principal tactic against the heavily fortified cities of the Near East. They developed a great variety of methods for breaching enemy walls. How did the Assyrian Empire end up becoming what it was at its prime? Well, while their military skills were impressive, and they could be adept at diplomacy when necessary, these were not the means by which the empire grew to rule over some of the ancient world. It was their skill in warfare. But why did they have such a big army? Well, they had a standing military almost all the time, unlike many other ancient civilizations. Why did they have one? Well, since the subject states did try to break away from the empire whenever they felt they had a chance of success, a standing army was necessary to ensure the stability of the empire from the enemies within, and as neighboring kingdoms like Urartu and Elam were often making incursions into the Assyrian territory, a professional army was also required for national defense. In the end, I have come up with a theory to answer the question we have started with. Even though civilizations before the Assyrians had the technology to make iron weapons, they didn't choose to do so. I believe this is because the Assyrians were the first civilization to have a real need for iron weapons. Their civilization was very unstable because it was pretty much a hodgepodge of many different ethnicities, per se. They also had a lot of enemies on the outside, so they need to be able to defend themselves. The Assyrians were also one of the first empires that were able to put all the different types of technology together and create iron weapons, which would help them defeat other empires. They used their multitude of resources to take over other countries and keep their own civilization stable, making them one of the most powerful civilizations in the ancient world.